Hello. Here comes the second one. Hello. Welcome to another episode of Heavy Hands. I am your host, Connor Rebush, joined, as always, by Phil McKenzie. And that's going to shock, apparently, some significant 20-30% of our audience. Because last week, Phil, I don't know if you remember, I forgot it, like, probably the moment I said it. I joked at the start of our discussion with Ed Gallo that he was replacing you. As far as I could tell from the YouTube comments, literally everyone took that seriously. So a few were sad, a few were elated. You know, like I was one of them on all of my alt accounts, being like, "Yes, thank God, finally we get a new host that's not this condescending English bastard." But you're still here, nevertheless.
Yeah, I know this was just one of your like modern data gathering programs. Heavy Hands is now the equivalent of a Facebook or a Google. You're just sending up trial balloons to see which way your next cynical turn will take you.
That's a good point. I do it as a joke. And then not a few people were sad, not enough people were excited. But you better believe it, buddy. If one more person had been really excited, you'd be out of here. You know? And then it's just a yeah.
Thanks, MMA rules /69. Save my bacon.
So, no, really, I'm glad that you're still here, Phil. I appreciate you coming back here to, I mean, who else would have so little respect for themselves that after 2 blessed weeks away from it, they would just dive right back into the UFC schedule, with me on this episode.
You are not hyped about Stefan Struve versus Ben Rothwell?
Oh, I forgot that one was happening.
both those guys are pretty tall.
Yeah, this is that kind of card. The selling points are as basic as, I don't know, one of these people or both of them are tall. I mean, it's not the worst card I've ever seen. It is a very, very low bar these days, though, for these fight night cards. It has one, I'll even go so far as to say 2 really strong matchups on it.
I think in general, it's very much a card where the quality is determined by the size of the fighters involved. And inversely correlated with. And that's not like an uncommon thing, but it's really stark for this one.
Yeah, that is very, very true. The heavyweight fights here, which of course, they have to be on the main card, and in the main event, definitely the worst fights on the card. But we do have, so let's see, before I just spend the whole first segment ragging on it, I'll let you know what we're going to be discussing today. We're not going to be focusing our energies entirely on UFC, where the hell is this happening? DC. We're also going to be covering one of the matchups from the upcoming UFC 245. We haven't actually fully decided which of those fights we're going to be covering. Do we decide it now on the air?
No, let's make it a surprise.
Okay. So one of the fights from UFC 245, because of course next week, we're probably just going to have time only to cover the 3 title fights, on the main episode. We'll stick a bonus episode in there for you if we have time for it. That's the plan anyway. So that's the stacked card. That's the one that, all of these other ones pale in comparison to. Before that, though, we are going to cover the most interesting pieces of this card in the United States Capitol. We've got, of course, the main event, Alistair Overeem versus... I've not yet figured out how to pronounce this. He's Dutch, so is it Jairzinho or is it Jairzinho like Portuguese?
I think it's Jairzinho.
Jairzinho Rozenstruik. The name we all love to spell. He's fighting Alistair Overeem in the main event. Co-main event, this is one of the ones that I think is quite compelling. Marina Rodriguez versus Cynthia Calvillo. That's a meaningful fight in the women's strawweight division. And if you haven't seen it, Rodriguez's last fight against Tisha Torres, very impressive performance. So that one is cool. We've also got, this may be the very best fight on the card, the bantamweight bout opening the main card. Cody Stamann versus Song Yadong, which, if this were Joe Silva, I would accuse the matchmaker of making another one of the, those Joe Silva classic pun matchups. because Song Yadong is, of course, a funny name for obvious reasons. And Cody Stamen is, of course, a flower penis. And what else? Oh, yeah, we talked about covering Rob Font, Ricky Simone as well. Although I will say, Thiago Alves versus Tim Means, that's a pretty cool fight by me. I like that one as well. So maybe we'll at least spare a few words for that. Okay, enough ado. I've filled up enough airtime. Oh, God, it's only been 5 minutes. I need to waffle more. No, let's get into it. Overeem versus Rozenstruik. Your thoughts, Phil?
There's a very good chance that this is short and doesn't tell us very much in the way that, many heavyweight main events tend to be. But specifically for this one, we've seen Rozenstruik has legitimate one-punch power and a good deal of composure and accuracy. And Alistair Overeem is a man who has been knocked out, let me think, how many times? Probably about, 16 or so over the course of his career. Something pretty sizable.
Let's check the numbers. 13.
13 times.
It's a few times.
Yeah. So I think, as others have pointed out, the whole kind of Overeem to... the Arlovski to Overeem path has been taken before by one big knockout puncher in the UFC, and that is Francis Ngannou. I think the difference between Ngannou and Rozenstruik is that Rozenstruik is clearly a better striker. He is, this is not particularly revolutionary to say. He's got much more of a background in kickboxing, but he is, whilst Ngannou picked up a few things relatively quickly in his career, he still wasn't a particularly deep striker by the time he got to Stipe Miocic. Rozenstruik is clearly much more able to fight on the front and the back foot. The downside is that Rozenstruik does not have Ngannou's natural grasp of how to grapple for MMA.
Yeah, in part perhaps just because he's much smaller. Like that probably has something to do with it, right? Like just tying up with Francis Ngannou is exhausting, and it's difficult to get his gigantic legs off the floor.
I think so, but I think
but also
Ngannou he's a natural grappler, I think.
Yeah,
that fight against Blades was his first one. It was a showcase between two guys who were, if not physically equal, close to physical parity, and one of whom was a, fairly well experienced and very, very determined and tough MMA wrestler. And we know how that kind of thing goes. The determined MMA wrestler always wins, except he didn't. Jairzinho Rozenstruik has fought people who he is at an athletic or strength parity with, and has not necessarily looked so great. And the one which I'm going to think of here is obviously his somewhat concerning first round against Junior Albini, where he got taken down with a somewhat underwhelming looking single leg off the cage and kind of a lateral drop.
Yeah, something that was either a lateral drop or a Polish throw. I don't know. We'll get Ed back in here to answer that question. Taken down multiple times, guard passed, several submission attempts, dominated on the floor by Junior Albini,
who is not a notable MMA wrestler.
He's certainly not Alistair Overeem in terms of grappling ability.
Yeah, and so one of the things you mentioned is, does Alistair Overeem actually go for much in the way of takedowns anymore? That's an interesting question. I think we have seen him. We saw him against Sergey Pavlovich, but it was mostly kind of outside trips. We saw him force I think his most kind of grappling focused game that we've seen recently was against Mark Hunt, and that was, a while ago now. But it showed the kind of stuff that you would hope to see from this fight, and he basically just forced the clinch and mashed Hunt into the fence, because those were notably where those takedowns against Rozenstruik came for Albini.
Mm-hmm.
I think in general we've seen good footwork from Rozenstruik.
Mm-hmm.
And that, closing distance carelessly against him has been
disastrous,
extremely, bad for the people who have done that. So I think he has a well-honed open space game, and he might even be able to sprawl on takedowns well in open space. We haven't really seen it.
Right. I kind of doubt it based on what we have seen from his wrestling, but
yeah. I mean, sometimes you do get guys who are just like, yeah, you know what I need? I just need a sprawl, and that's it. And it's their one, it's the old 6 months of sprawl training meme.
Uh-huh.
So that seems to be like the general bad thing. I mean, also, added to that is the fact that he started eating level change mix-ups from Albini after he took those takedowns, even in open space. But then there's the problem from Overeem's side, which is that he's definitely become a more MMA-centric fighter in that he's picked up both the good and bad habits of MMA. He's become someone who's very able to assert a specific game plan for an opponent, but he's also sort of slipped into the MMA meta game a bit too readily at times, I feel, which means that he'll go for a lot of like aimless movement and a general assumption that people are going to be scared off by blitzes and punching power. And as you mentioned, this is not necessarily something which we've seen working well against Rozenstruik. I mean, you would have thought, given who Ngannou was and what he'd shown, the last thing you would want to do at him is throw, as Overeem did, a giant blitzing hook into winging combination at him. Yet Overeem couldn't really stop himself from doing that.
Yep, it's in his bones to try to scare the guy off with a blind swing.
And you've got to kind of feel that if he does that against Rozenstruik, he's just getting his head ripped off again.
Yeah. So that's the difficult thing here, is that like Rozenstruik is essentially a perfectly imperfect combination of Francis Ngannou and Sergey Pavlovich. He's got the dangerous counterpunching. Specifically, Rozenstruik is a quite good left hand counterpuncher. I strongly suspect he's like a converted southpaw. All of his best shots. He's got a great stiff jab. He hurt Arlovsky with it. He dropped Alan Crowder with it. His knockout of Arlovsky after hurting him with the jab was the check hook, which I think is also the shot he got. Who else? Oh, I don't know. They all blend together. these damn Jairzinho Rozenstruik fights. So he's got a great left hand. I agree with you. He's got nice basic footwork, especially by heavyweight standards. Like, in the same way that like Mark Hunt came in, and despite being a super aged version of Mark Hunt, and having similar weaknesses to wrestling and grappling, he came in and it was like, oh, he steps to the side when he throws his counterpunch. And that was enough to just like rocket him up to title contention. So there's all these things that I can really see troubling Overeem. To me, like the big question of this matchup is pretty obvious. It's does Overeem get him down? And you said before I was questioning how much he goes for takedowns. I think we've seen at least one in the Sergey Pavlovich fight. One which I think he felt highly incentivized to do so by the matchup, where he did go in there looking to clinch and looking to score takedowns from the clinch. Likewise against Mark Hunt. I don't recall if he got any takedowns, but it was a lot of pushing the clinch, getting Mark Hunt to the fence. All of that is bad news for Rozenstruik. Overeem is still, I think, a little bigger and stronger. He's a great clinch fighter. It's always been one of his best skill sets. My question is that enough to get Rozenstruik down? Because the thing with the Albini fight, and don't let me tell you it's not terribly embarrassing to be taken down by Albini in any way, But the thing with that fight is that pretty much every entry into a wrestling engagement from Albini was a shot. Even the ones where he didn't end up finishing the shot, like that is how he got to clinch range. What I've seen from Overeem getting to the clinch is kind of just walking forward and grabbing onto someone. And like if he tries it enough times, that'll definitely work eventually. I think there's a really high chance though that like just try that once and he's just getting cracked with a Rozenstruik left hand. And if he's just trying to walk after him, it's at least gonna take a few more attempts for it to work in the aggregate because of Rozenstruik's footwork, the footwork with which he throws his counters. So I don't know. I'm just not sold on Overeem's ability to take down someone who absolutely like doesn't want to tie up with him and has the skills to avoid just being closed down with such a simple approach.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's not really. This is a definite two true outcome fight. I don't think there's like whichever one happens is going to look super obvious in retrospect. Mm-hmm. Like either Overeem is just going to get clobbered, and we're going to think, oh yeah, he's never really beaten people who are just comfortable in punching exchanges,
right?
And on the other hand, like if Overeem gets him down and then just immediately pounds him out, it's going to be like, oh yeah, Overeem is marginally more potent from top position than Junior Albini is.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to pick Overeem. He's been generally good at leveraging his skill set for the person he's up against. Particularly since, I guess, the Rothwell fight, I would say, is that he's generally he's wrestled people who are vulnerable to that. He's outstruck people he's outstruck people that he was there to outstrike. And in general, his problems have been when he's tried to outmuscle people and it hasn't worked and he's gotten scared. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure that Rozenstruik is better in the clinch and better and more physically capable than he showed in that Albini fight by now. I mean, I hope so, but he showed such a specific weakness against the cage that I think that if Overeem can approximately replicate that Mark Hunt game plan of just tie him up and then push him into the cage and then mash him and then pick up opportunistic takedowns, I think that's there. And I think, Overeem still remains a very, very deep fighter, one with, particularly in grappling situations, and one it's just very dangerous to be stuck underneath. So I guess I'll pick him. But yeah, like I said, him getting... Oh, the other thing, I think he'll probably go southpaw open stance for this one, which might make it it might ameliorate some of that jab left hook threat. But who knows?
Yeah, I'm unsure about that because I'm going off these last two Overeem fights. We saw him against Pavlovich. Very classic kickboxing Overeem, crouching, orthodox stance, a lot more pressuring, relying heavily on that double forearm guard. I think because in that fight he wanted to step forward into the clinch and ultimately get Pavlovich down. Against Oleinik, he did not want to be taken down. And so he went to the new Overeem approach that we've come to love, and all the great fights it's given us of just like hopping and skipping and fleeing from that southpaw stance. And it was Oleinik who forced all of the clinches in that fight largely. So I don't know, against Rozenstruik, like the matchup seems to incentivize someone like Overeem to want to close the distance and clinch. Rozenstruik's got a fairly good sense of distance, doesn't tend to go too crazy and overcommit and fall into the clinch. So if it gets there, I think it's more likely to be Overeem walking him down. And it's like you said, whatever happens is going to seem super obvious. I think it's going to be a definitive ending one way or the other. maybe an X factor is that Rozenstruik appears to be very, very durable. Maybe have, very durable, a little younger at least. Significantly younger, 8 years younger. Maybe can survive a bad round where if Overeem ends up in a bad spot, I'd have less faith of that. Like, certainly getting put against the fence by Alexei Oleinik and getting smashed with hard right hands by someone who's just willing to close the distance quickly. I mean, quickly for Alexei Oleinik is not even the same universe as like slowly for Rozenstruik. He's way faster, way more accurate. I don't know, like, it feels awful to be... I consider myself something of an Overeem whisperer, Phil. And it feels terrible to pick someone with such bad wrestling and grappling over someone whose well-roundedness I have always respected. But I don't know. I just think Rozenstruik might bully him. And if he ends up in the kind of bad position he's found himself in a couple of recent fights against the fence, or walking into counters, or feeling like he has to swing desperately, I just think Rozenstruik is like uniquely suited to kill him for doing that. So, the speed, the counters, the quick triggers, and the desperate hope that Overeem won't ever tie up or attempt a takedown. I'm going to go with Rozenstruik.
Yep. Well, I can't fault you for it, but I'll take the old warhorse to come out with some kind of appropriate game plan one more time.
Mm-hmm. I've said this before. I think I've always liked Overeem. I've always enjoyed watching his fights. But I think he's particularly endearing because it does feel like being knocked out a million times has seriously humbled him.
Mm-hmm.
He seems like a much sweeter man than he used to be, in addition to, still being a great, well-rounded fighter. I hope you're right. I'll be rooting for Overeem. But it's heavyweight. I think the sad thing will happen. Okay, that's a full segment. God damn it. How did we spend 15 minutes discussing that fight? This always happens. Let's take a break. When we come back, the co-main event actually deserves a full segment, at least more than this one did. So we're going to try to hit Marina Rodriguez versus Cynthia Calvillo and Cody Stamann versus Song Yadong after this.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it.
All right, welcome back to Heavy Hands. We are continuing down the main card of UFC Overeem versus Rozenstruik. Let's hit the co-main event, as promised. Marina Rodriguez versus Cynthia Calvillo. I think these two women sort of represent opposite directions in terms of like sensible fighter development. Marina Rodriguez has a strength. She reminds me a lot. We were discussing before whether it was just the like badly rounded shoulder posture in the frame or something else. She reminds me a lot of early UFC career Ioana Jędrzejczyk. She's got a long frame. She's super aggressive in the clinch, which means if you try to hit a takedown and fail, she punishes the shit out of you for trying to take her down. And she is prone to throwing really, really quick flurries of punches. I think she may be doing that even with a little more power than we saw out of early career Ioana Jędrzejczyk, while perhaps not quite having her wrestling ability. Cynthia Calvillo, What a shitty fucking intro. Marina Rodriguez has developed in such a way that she is emphasizing her strengths. And I think Cynthia Calvillo feels at this point sort of like an opposite, like she's moving in the opposite direction. Where Cynthia Calvillo came to the UFC as someone who is essentially like a dynamite backtake specialist, a phenomenal scrambler, someone whose offensive wrestling maybe needed a little work, but someone whose game suggests that she should be going for a lot of offensive wrestling, because that's where she's at her best. And yet she's sort of developed into like a team alpha male style striker. Whereas the vast majority of time she spent against Courtney Casey, for example, was on the feet. There was that Joanne Calderwood fight where she spent a lot of time striking. So I don't know. It sort of feels like Calvillo, while she came into the UFC a hot prospect and someone with lots of potential and some remarkable singular talents, I wonder if she's still like really developing and getting better as a fighter. Whereas Marina Rodriguez, I don't know. Like I said at the top of the show, that win over Tisha Torres, certainly the most impressive thing she's done in her career to date, and a very, very solid win. So what do you make of this matchup?
To me, this matchup feels a lot like... does it not feel like a kind of a redux of both their last fights?
Yes.
Is that they both kind of won those fights and have then since stepped up to fight similar people to the person they fought the last time. In this case, Cynthia Calvillo was last fighting Courtney Casey, a huge, lumbering violence machine, and is such, she's taking on Marina Rodriguez, who has just beaten a short, blitzing wrestle boxer type.
Mm-hmm. I would only dispute that the implication that Marina Rodriguez is lumbering. That seems to be the main difference between her and Courtney Casey, is she's quick and agile, very quick and agile in comparison.
Yeah, I think Courtney Casey she improved that. She has improved that a little bit, but yeah, I think that's fair. She's much quicker on her feet than Calvillo than Casey is.
Certainly has better.
That's probably still true of pretty much everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I do think that Calvillo's last performance was reasonably impressive against Casey, even if it wasn't the kind of one that leaves you thinking, this is really translatable to beating Marina Rodriguez, because the things she showed were less in the explicit ability to hit takedowns and more kind of in the improvements of the area that's around it. I think she's shown that she's becoming a pretty active boxer. I mean, she has at least improved from that absolutely dismal performance against Joanne Calderwood.
We'll talk about that perhaps.
Yeah. But she's shown the ability not just to blitz into the inside, but to be like a pretty active fighter in the interstitial spaces. I think a lot of what won her that Courtney Casey fight wasn't necessarily just that she was able to leap in with a single strike or even two strikes, but that she was able to run through a series of like collar ties and punches and then either move to a takedown or angle back out again. And Casey was never quite able to adjust.
And that is something that sets her apart from Tisha Torres, is like Calvillo seems much more naturally inclined to just sort of keep the exchange, to keep the scrap going.
Yeah, that's the problem with Torres, is that she tends to hit the clinch and then just go to wrestling exchanges. Unless she's very confident that weirdly enough, unless she's only really aggressive in the clinch with strikes when she's very confident that she has a strength edge. Otherwise, she seems to just haul away at a takedown in the understanding that she might be able to hit it.
Some part of Tisha Torres doesn't really want to strike, I don't think. You know what I mean? She's not comfortable in any kind of fight where her opponent feels like they have like an equal chance of hitting her. Whereas, yeah, Calvillo much more likely to just like wipe that feeling away by punching through it.
Yeah.
Scrappier by nature is what I'm saying.
Yeah. But also, in a lot of ways, I would argue still a better fighter than Cynthia Calvillo.
Yes.
I think that just in terms of her general defense, her ability to put her strikes together when she is going for combinations, and specifically her ability to set up her takedowns. And that was probably the most impressive thing about her fight with Rodriguez, is that Rodriguez has kind of improved from someone with really kind of non-existent takedown defense to someone with what is increasingly looking like, I'm not going to say good, but at least not bad and quite punishing takedown defense over her time in the UFC. And more significantly, she's done it without really dropping her volume much.
Yes. Yeah.
A lot of people tend, when they start to work on their takedown defense, they tend to just, sit there and wait for something to turn aside, or maybe set out a singular striking approach that they can then use to ensure that a takedown is coming from a particular angle. She's improved her takedown defense while staying pretty much the same aggressive, relentless fighter she was.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's fair to say pretty good about the takedown defense we saw in the Torres fight. Some of this had to do, I think, with her frame. I think having a big reach advantage sort of balances out that moment of hesitation you get when you're trying to decide whether your opponent is about to punch you or about to try to take you down. Being able to keep them at a longer distance, and certainly that's a problem for little short-armed Tecia Torres. But in frame, she's not that far away from Cynthia Calvillo. She's a way better shot takedown artist. So I think Rodriguez has shown that her takedown defense at that first layer of takedown defense has improved to the point that, because what kind of shot artist is Cynthia Calvillo? You spoke about her not setting up her shots as well as Torres. I think that's true, but also I don't know, she isn't much of a takedown artist at all, is she?
Not really. It's
a lot of her best moments. It does
seem that it's been, her takedowns have increasingly become just a way to close distance. The drive or ability to finish hasn't increased at all since she was fighting Pearl Gonzalez or whoever it was.
Right. And a lot of her best moments as a wrestler and grappler have been sort of defensive counter moves. Somebody gets in on her or ties up with her, and then she will find a way to the back or find a way to win the scramble and end up in a superior position. But as a shot takedown artist, I don't know. Here's the other thing I want to hit is we're talking about, you said she's definitely improved since the Calderwood fight. I think so. I think we've at least seen higher volume and more accurate volume punching performances since then. My question is, how much of that disparity just has to do with the fact that Calderwood has a Marina Rodriguez style frame? Because if you look at the numbers on the surface, the punches, the strikes thrown against Calderwood really weren't that different from the numbers that Calvillo puts up in most of her fights. What was different was it was her lowest connect percentage. She was very uncomfortable finding her range and sort of wading into that whole zone of everything between jab range into clinch knee range had her a little shook, I think, against Joanne Calderwood. Do you agree? Do you think that was a significant factor?
It's less. It's obvious. I think it's less frame because obviously Casey is huge.
Well, Calderwood has a frame and is actually
So I think it's more ability to fight a range game. I think Calderwood's she just generally gets a lot of praise for being a clinch fighter, but she's actually been a pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
If you give her, she's got a kind of slight Cerrone vibe to her, where if you give her her mid-range, she's actually pretty offensively capable.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Casey will just kind of wade forward the whole time, and I think that set her up for Calvillo's blitzes a bit more. Whereas Calderwood kind of stood her ground and gave a zone of danger which Calvillo was very uncomfortable moving into.
And that is a Rodriguez thing. That sort of reflects her game very well. So I gotta say, my feeling is Marina Rodriguez at this point is the superior prospect. And I think in this matchup in particular, just kind of has the edge. I just see her making Calvillo reluctant about closing the distance and really committing to her shots. Like, what's the best way to say this? If a main difference between Calvillo and Torres as opponents is that Calvillo is just way feistier and scrappier, then does the fact that Rodriguez is an accurate, quick, well-schooled long-range striker with a big reach advantage enough to just essentially make her the same as Torres? And I kind of think, yeah, it is.
Yeah, it's worth remembering that Randa Marcos fight as well, because Marcos, for all her flaws, if you give her a scrappy, high-paced brawl, she's very happy to fight that kind of fight. And Rodriguez did that and kind of, I don't want to say broke her, but she really badly discouraged Marcos and had her looking more messed up by the end of that than almost all her other opponents have done. Yeah. I think scrappiness is not necessarily going to cut it here.
Yeah, the thing is, Rodriguez is scrappy too. Like, she's not a range fighter who desperately needs you to stay away. She's like, that's the main Jędrzejczyk comparison. She uses her reach in a very mean way. She wants to bully you with the fact that she can hit you at a range where you can't touch her. So she's not afraid at all to, once she sticks you with that jab that backs you off a half step forward and throw 3 hard punches. And like I said, also just brutal in the clinch. Great frames, great knees, just really difficult to actually set up in a strong position because she's always getting her forearms and her elbows in there and constantly hitting you. Knees to the body, knees to the head, elbow strikes to the head. There's no time to rest and think about your next move. And that's what you have to look forward to the entire time you are trying to bridge the distance, where she is also quite effective. So Marina Rodriguez feels like a pretty straightforward pick to me in this matchup.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think she's probably just going to put out too much violence.
Yeah, which is cool. I like her. I want to see her fight more good strawweights. So looking forward to that. We don't have as much time as I would have liked because we're really bad at keeping anything short. So why don't we go ahead and make this a long segment and just say now that we're probably going to spend another 10, 15 minutes at least discussing Cody Stamann versus Song Yadong. What do you think? I'll let you lead off on this one.
So this, one of the two really, really good fights on this card that jumps out. I think Cody Stamann he's hit a little bit of a wall in the division of late, just because I think he has a game which is very functional. He's a clever fighter. It makes a lot of sense, and he just isn't quite dynamic enough in a division which is full of insane power punchers or guys that can just drown you in volume, or submission machines like
Sterling.
His problem is that he doesn't really have the firepower. And Yadong has, as with Weili Zhang, has been one of those shocking prospects from China who just looks like he came from a completely that scene has accelerated so quickly. He looks like a incredibly well composed, powerful, dangerous prospect who is fairly well rounded and functional in all areas. So this is basically a fascinating test of whether Yadong can be just thrown off his game.
Never. Never, Phil. All right? And I don't need those pills or anything, all right? Don't even imply that. When will I reach an age where I can have just a sober discussion about a fighter whose name is Yadong? Oh, God. Okay.
Will Yadong or Stamann be the one who wilts Connor?
That works on so many levels, Phil. That's a great joke. Sorry, I have to shake it out. not Yadong, but something else. I think firepower is definitely part of it for Cody Stamann, the sort of wall that he's hit. I think he's also kind of limited by his frame. Maybe he needs that firepower so much because he is so short-armed. I think another thing that stands out to me about him is how much of like a single strike fighter he really is. You know, like this was a problem in that fight with Aljamain Sterling even before he eventually got taken down. Is like, in some ways his game is functional, but in some ways it's a bit of a throwback. It's like a lot of it plays off of that 50-50 switch up of, is it going to be the big hard punch or is it going to be the shot? Mm-hmm. A lot of his strikes, it's like a single left hook. It's a single, again, it's all like, it all sort of, it's a game that demands more power, basically. It demands more horsepower because it relies on you being willing to wait and try to guess what's coming next. That relies on you having like a certain sort of respect for his strikes and his attacks that they don't necessarily warrant. Like if I'm trying to back you up and get you worried about, am I going to throw the left hook or the left high kick, or some other switch up like that, you have to be worried about what I may do if I land one of those strikes. And if you're not worried about that, then it would behoove me to throw more variety, more volume, more aggressive with my feints, you know, to fill in the gaps that the simple threat of power isn't. So to me, like in the Sterling fight, I just see him going in there, trying these single strikes, and then every time Sterling throws like a kick and then a punch, it hits him clean. He's not particularly good at thinking into that second layer of the exchange. And just not particularly good defensively at someone who is capable of coming back with that second layer. And that does seem quite a bit like Song Yadong to me. He's a pretty fucking dynamite counterpuncher, isn't he?
Yeah.
Really sharp footwork, incredibly quick hands. And basically, like, so far, I think the main flaw that we have seen out of Song Yadong is that he sort of tires. You know, everything is like 100%, full energy. And I don't even know if it's fair to call it a pattern yet, because as far as I know, it basically just happened in the Vince Morales fight, where he spent the better part of 2.5 rounds really beating Vince Morales up. And then Morales came out with a very courageous third round, put the pressure on him, threw more volume, and by the end, it looked a lot like what we've seen out of Zabit Magomedsharipov a few times. The thing is, though, like, I think Cody Stamann kind of has that issue as well. Mm-hmm. I don't know how often this has really been mentioned, but there's a notable change in the body language and the dynamicism of Cody Stamann, even between rounds 1 and 2.
Yeah, that's the other issue. Yeah, he doesn't seem to be he's a burst offense fighter who can't keep exploding as quickly as he can. Like, I mean, both these guys, you know, they explode a lot, but like Yadong, also stops exploding quite so much over the course of.
You're doing it on purpose.
I am. Yeah, so I think the main question is, who's the best wrestler we've seen Song Yadong fight? And is it Felipe Arantes? Is it Barat Kandare?
It's probably Alejandro Perez, but he didn't really get a chance to show that.
It's Alejandro Perez, but he is a classic AKA person who's been trained at AKA and has, you know, in that gym, you either become a wrestler or you become an anti-wrestler, and there is nothing in between, and he's clearly gone down the other route. So he just had a bunch of kickboxing exchanges.
Mm-hmm. And that's the thing is Cody Stamann will go out there and try to take you down. He doesn't even give a shit. Like, he did that to Aljamain Sterling. He tried to out-wrestle him.
Yeah.
And largely did until he finally got taken down himself. I think he had all the successful takedowns up to the one that led to the end of the fight. He will come out aggressive. He will pressure. And like I said, he will use those switch-ups to set up takedowns. He will get in deep on a shot. And that's a very important question, because Song Yadong, it's one of those cases where we have seen all of the right signs out of him. You know, we've seen all of the right technical responses. He's digging an underhook when he needs to dig an underhook. He's breaking away from the fence when he needs to break away. He's creating space when he needs to create space, whatever. But we haven't actually seen it against anyone who's even like remotely as good at wrestling as Cody Stamann is. And so like, what would happen if Cody Stamann fought a way more athletic version of Tyrion Ware?
Mm-hmm.
But then again, Ware was competitive in that fight, so like there's still something about the striking game of Cody Stamann.
He was competitive-ish. I think probably the better example might be Tom Duquesnoy.
Okay,
This was an athletic finisher who just ended up biting on too many of Stamann's mix-ups because he wasn't sure of what was coming.
Right.
And Stamann might be one shot at a time, but he's much more diverse than the classic right hand or shot kind of.
Yes. Yeah.
Kind of threat. He's a good kicker. He's a weird kicker.
He's got a good jab. He's got a great left hook.
Yeah.
Got body shots. He's got variety.
I think if Song Yadong waits on him, I think that could be a problem. Because I think Stamann will be more than happy to just see, I'm just going to throw a kick out there, how do you react to it? I'm going to throw a low kick out there, how do you react to it? I'm going to throw a single punch, how do you react to it? Then I'm going to go for a takedown as you try and counter me. This kind of thing. So,
and he may end up waiting on him because, I may have spoken about the lack of power, hinting to opponents that they don't actually have to wait on the switch-ups. But if you actually have some legitimate reason to be very concerned about the takedown threat, it basically accomplishes the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah. So I mean, I think this fight is a big X factor. Because I think that Yadong looks like a very high quality prospect, but we've seen Stamann beat very high quality prospects before that we might have expected him to just be able to out violence, and his only loss has been to someone whom is probably the best grappler in this division.
Yep.
And even then, he was, as you mentioned, he was competitive and dictated a lot of the early wrestling exchanges.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I think I might actually pick Stamann. This feels like a bit of a not respecting the coming man kind of thing. And I've done this before, specifically with Weili Zhang. I was just I don't think there's no way we can know that she's got the takedown defense to deal with Tisha Torres.
Yep.
And then she just did. I was just oh, okay then. Maybe I did pick Weili Zhang to win that. No, I don't think I did. But yeah, I mean, I think Stamann was able to dictate early wrestling exchanges against Aljamain Sterling, who was a very good wrestler. The only thing that lost him that match was that Sterling is also an extraordinarily good scrambler.
Mm-hmm.
That it wasn't simply the wrestling defense that saved Sterling. And I don't know, despite the fact that Song Yadong looks like he's an incredibly composed and dangerous counter striker, I've never really seen Stamann hurt by a strike particularly badly.
True. Very tough.
If they've both got slight gas tank issues, then I'll take Stamann's ability to maybe control the first couple of rounds. But yeah, I think a lot of this hinges on how much of a pace Song Yadong is comfortable with setting. I think if he comes out and he's just using jabs and low kicks to draw Stamann into shots, then I think that gets very dangerous for Stamann. I think because he's going to be forcing shots on a fundamentally bigger, more powerful fighter, and I think he can be made to walk into something big.
I think there's
Yadong decides he's going to fight defensively. I think it becomes a problem for him.
Yeah, I agree. I think a lot of this depends on Yadong's ability to keep the fight in open space and to push Stamann back lots of feints, aggressive with the jabs and the kicks to keep him at range, to keep him backing off. I've decided, it's a bit early for a New Year's resolution, but I think I'm just going to stop being a sucker and picking against ridiculous athletes. So I'm going to pick Song Yadong. We led this discussion talking about you making a very good point, I think, about Cody Staman's sort of lack of horsepower, his lack of dynamism, and that is like all Song Yadong is. It's just like unrestricted dynamism, crazy changes of speed, shocking power, even to the extent that we have seen him hit some, in like a Peter Yan kind of way, some remarkable takedowns of his own, where he can just sort of decide to do things at a speed that most people can't compete with. I think the biggest thing I see out of Cody Stamann is that once you even get to that second round and he's slowed down notably, like just none of those shots I think are going to surprise Song Yadong unless Stamann gets a really strong first round and really plants the threat of the takedown in his mind. And I know it's a level of competition thing. I just don't see that happening to Song Yadong in this fight. I just think he's operating at a level of speed that is going to make it a lot harder for Stamann to plant that seed in his head.
It's worth mentioning, I said that how tough Stamann was. Alejandro Perez is a very tough fighter.
Yes, he is.
And Song Yadong just absolutely clobbered him dead.
Yeah. So, all right, sticking with Yadong, as I always do. And let's end the segment before I feel the need to say anything more about that. When we come back, something from UFC 245.
Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. And you can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show.
All right, welcome back to Heavy Hands. Phil is insisting that we cover Ricky Simón versus Rob Font. This is Phil's idea. We could have moved on to UFC 245 just like that, easy as anything. Gotten through this episode with only being, no more than 10 minutes over the hour limit that I try to enforce. And instead, Phil has forced me to start segment 3 with a long, bitter rant, which is only increasing the runtime of the episode more without covering fights. Phil, explain yourself.
I like this fight. I think it's good.
Oh, okay. Yeah, fair enough. Rob Font, Ricky Simón. What do you say?
I still want to believe in Rob Font. He is quite rote and gets very uncomfortable if people rush him down, which says kind of bad things if he's just fighting featherweight Clay Guida.
Mm-hmm.
But he throws a nice long jab. He's got a good uppercut and a good step knee, and he's just super fucking violent. And I'm going to pick him to do violent things because I want to believe that's a good way of fighting.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I will point to the fact that Ricky Simón beat Montel Jackson.
He did?
So I think he could beat Rob Font. Like, we're talking a guy with real long arms and really big hands who hits hard. Even someone I don't know that Rob Font is strong enough to just peel off takedown attempts just by virtue of having monster hands. And yet Ricky Simón was, like you said, he's featherweight Clay Guida. Very persistent, dogged wrestler. Quite dynamic as well, like Clay in his youth, in his prime. Quite an athletic wrestler. I guess what we saw in in Simone's fight with Uriah Faber is that he can get way too fucking excited and make really poor decisions. But like otherwise, hitting people on the counter while being pushed back by an overly excited maniac isn't typically how Rob Font gets his knockouts. So I think Ricky Simone will beat him.
Yeah, it's the Rob Font thing is more of a hope thing. Yeah, he does seem to like being the big man pushing people around, and like he gets a lot of confidence when his stuff is working, and loses a fair amount of it when it isn't.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you're probably right, but let's go violence.
Okay. Well, that's out of the way. Oh, wait, I forgot. I was going to be like, we get to move on to something fun, but we decided we're going to talk about Marlon Moraes versus Jose Aldo, so it's really no better. Can we talk about Simone versus Font some more?
No. Tell me about how excited you are to see Jose Aldo making his cut to bantamweight. Isn't it what you've always wanted?
Yeah, it's exactly the direction in which I wanted his weight class change to go. It's not even the fucking polar opposite. I don't know.
Remember our rules of when you should change weight class. You know, if you're starting to lose on cardio and pace, but you're an invincible anti-wrestler who wants to strike, the logical thing for you to do is, of course, to go down to the lower division, particularly the one characterized as it is by nuclear-powered punchers with high pace.
Yeah, so it's... I mean, I don't know if I'm reading too much into what you said just there, Phil, but you seem to be implying that it's a very poor move for Jose Aldo at this point in his career. And that's the thing, because if it wasn't if he wasn't doing the weight class change, like, in a lot of ways, Marlon Moraes is just kind of a worse Jose Aldo. You know, like, he got similar problems to Aldo, as we saw in the Cejudo fight. Like, he can be suckered into a fight that tests his cardio in poor ways. He's a counter puncher, maybe a little more so than Aldo is, but doesn't necessarily have certainly doesn't have Aldo's level of takedown defense. Like, this would be a very competitive and interesting matchup that I would be super excited to talk about, if only it didn't involve Aldo, a man who has famously had lots of trouble in the past getting to 145 consistently, cutting all the way to 135, where every picture I've seen online, he looks absolutely skeletal and disgusting, and it doesn't make me feel good to think about it.
Yeah, I remember that. I can't remember what fight it was, but I remember the behind-the-scenes videos that they subsequently deleted of Aldo whimpering in pain at his weight cut and saying, whatever I do, I'm not getting in that bath again. And yeah, and now he's several years older. And yeah, I mean, the main thing is, I'm not even sure this is going to be like, okay, whatever happens, I'm not sure that this can be fun.
Yeah.
Even if Aldo clobbers him, I don't know if I'm going to be happy about that.
He's just going to go to 135 again.
Do I want this experiment to be validated?
Because you know what happens then is they're going to make him fight Cody Garbrandt, and Cody Garbrandt's going to knock out Jose Aldo.
Oh, yeah.
That is the most tragic outcome possible. Nothing darker than that. Instead of Cody Garbrandt getting knocked out again by Rafael Assunção, which is what I've been asking for, they will feed Aldo to him. Or maybe not. I don't know. I'm just bumming myself out thinking about it. The thing is like, sorry, I think I cut you off. Let me try to predict what you were going to say though. Barring the idea of Aldo knocking Moraes out, the other two likely outcomes are Moraes wins probably by knocking Jose out. I don't know why that. Maybe I'm overemphasizing how likely that is because of the huge weight drain, but that's just how I feel about weight cuts, and we've certainly seen that borne out in the past. The other outcome would be Aldo beating Moraes, which were you maybe expecting that would be a slow, point-fighty kind of affair?
Yeah.
Sort of neutralizing Moraes in the way that Rafael Sunsao successfully did, and that John Dodson, like, sort of less successfully did. Because, like, so far, that's been the way to beat Moraes in the UFC, is to freeze him out of counterpunching opportunities with a heavy, feint, highly jab and feint heavy outside kickboxing game, which Aldo can definitely do. But, yeah.
I will say one thing is that Aldo's reliance on the pivot as his main form of footwork does obviously leave him a bit vulnerable to leg kick battles. And we've seen this specifically against Volkanovski, who just racked up a ton of meaningless volume by kicking Aldo's leg and basically just gamed his approach.
And Moraes cannot be scared out of his leg kicking game the way that Aldo can.
Yeah. And Moraes is just, he's just a very diverse, dangerous kicker. If Aldo comes out like, I'm just going to stalk this guy down and counter him when he throws hard, Moraes can throw out non-committal leg kicks and then just gradually ramp up the power.
Yeah.
And I just kind of think that that's probably what's going to happen. They're both going to fight fairly cautiously. Aldo really doesn't initiate much from a distance. And all Moraes has to do is peck away at the lead leg like Volkanovski did. And
he's faster than Volkanovski, too. Very quick kicker.
Yeah, exactly. He's a quicker kicker. He's obviously a much, much better kicker. I mean, he can actually, if he lands kicks at the same speed that Volkanovski was throwing, he can actually genuinely hurt Jose Aldo, unlike, what Volkanovski was doing. But the other thing is that Aldo throws a nice, long, straight, powerful right hand, and Moraes showed a shocking and bizarre tendency to just gobble them up when he fought Cejudo. So should Aldo decide that at some point he's going to counter those kicks by just stepping down and coming in, wouldn't be super surprised to see Moraes just get clocked.
Yeah, what if Aldo goes super aggressive and tries to force the clinch on Moraes?
Yeah, that's another thing. Like if Aldo's like bursts of punch offense, like if he just comes forward with those kind of combinations that he was throwing against Holloway, I'm not like convinced that Moraes is going to be able to get away from that without getting clobbered. But I mean, yeah, with the weight cut, with the way aging fighters tend to respond to hideous, draining weight cuts, with the fact that I just think we're going to get a fairly tedious range kickboxing fight where Moraes just starts to rack up leg kick volume and then it gets depressing.
Yeah, and if Aldo did come out with a very aggressive approach, it might actually make like the most strategic sense against someone with a speed advantage, like Moraes.
It might also drain his cardio in like 30 seconds.
Right, and also like Cejudo got the. Like I say Cejudo basically did like a short-armed version of what Holloway did to Aldo against Moraes. He drained his energy by making him counter. That's not to say that Moraes isn't a good counterpuncher. Cejudo's chin is incredible, but he ate a lot of shit in the early going of that fight. He ate a lot of full power punches and kicks to the head, all type of shit like that. Of course, we're talking Jose Aldo, who has vastly superior defense to Henry Cejudo, but will be relatively slower in this division. And my main concern with the weight cut is always, less brain fluid, so worse chin. So, like, even if he is super aggressive, even if he's having success doing that, can he afford to take, half as many even of the shots that Henry Cejudo absorbed from Moraes? I'm not confident of that. Maybe I'm just sadness hedging, and it's very likely. I know I'm doing a lot of it, in fact, but I just don't like this fight for Jose Aldo. It just makes me feel bad, and I think that weight cut is just the awful X factor hanging over everything like a specter. Like every possible game plan I consider, I'm just like, well, what the hell is he going to look like draining himself to 135? Because physically he looks awful. So I'm picking Marlon Moraes to beat Jose Aldo, I guess.
Yeah, I'm doing that too. And yeah, I gotta say, won't even be that happy if Aldo wins. So I just don't. I don't want to see him here. I want to see him at lightweight. I think he would be cool at lightweight.
I was very happy with Contender Crusher Aldo at featherweight. He could have kept doing that for the rest of his career, and I would have been like, this is a great way for a legendary champion to close things out. Just continually show all the upstarts. He's still got it. But he's got to chase a title. Like, maybe that's just who Aldo is, but I don't.
But I think he could do that, but he could do that at lightweight,
and
he wouldn't be killing himself. I mean, who at lightweight would you really favor Jose Aldo over? I mean, would you really favor over Jose Aldo? Yeah. Like, if they weren't, like, assuming that he's physically there, and you would assume that, like, you know, if he's not putting his body under the stress of cutting weight, which he's always done particularly badly, that he would be more physically there. That he would be more likely to keep himself in, you know, to keep himself looking like Jose Aldo. I mean, I would probably pick like Poirier and probably Gaethje, just because they would just be able to drown him in offense. But I'm not sure if I would pick that many others.
Yeah, you might be tempted to pick Khabib for being like way bigger and stronger, more athletic. And, you know, moving up in weight, the grapplers have the advantage. But we're also talking about Jose Aldo, like the best defensive wrestler ever.
Yep.
So that's a pretty good buffer against the dangers of moving up in weight. Yeah, I just don't fucking understand this decision to move down to 135. I hate it. I hate
it so much.
What's that?
Hate it so much.
Yeah. No, it's bad. Okay, well, next week's episode, I think, will be a lot more cheerful. We are going to be previewing the top 3 title fights headlining UFC 245. Those being Kamaru Usman versus Colby Covington, which, and I can say this on air because I'm pretty damn sure it's going through. We're going to get that bastard Ed Gallo back on the show to discuss that particular fight. It's a very wrestling matchup, and I, for one, am very much looking forward to hearing his thoughts on it. There's also Max Holloway versus Alexander Volkanovski, which rules. That's a fantastic and fascinating matchup. And there's Amanda Nunes versus Jermaine Durandamy, which also rules and is a great matchup. And I'm excited to see Jermaine Durandamy taking on like other good, powerful, counterpunching kickboxers. I think that's an underrated great matchup, actually. People tend to underrate GDR, but she's very good at the kickboxing aspect of this game, and that is where Amanda Nunes likes to keep things. I think that's going to be a great fight. Whether we get to it on the main show or not, we're also going to be talking about Peter Yan versus Uriah Faber, which is silly and absurd, but I certainly don't feel as bad about seeing Uriah Faber get mopped by young fighters as I do Jose Aldo. Jeff Neal versus Mike Perry. There's other stuff as well. So look forward to next week's episode. I promise you it will be cheerful and more relevant than this week's. And thank you, by the way, to everyone who gave us such great feedback on last week's show and the show before that. We are really going to make a concerted effort to, in future, when we come up on, you know, perhaps the next Overeem versus Rozenstruik tier card, just sort of feel more comfortable ignoring it and talking about something else, dipping into the history of this sport, talking about, you know, some of our favorite fighters and stylists, and discussing technique and strategy in a more abstract way, disconnected from the schedule. So I'm looking forward to that as well. By the sounds of the feedback we got, many of you are as well. I'm sorry to have disappointed a few of you by Phil being on this episode, but seeing as he's here, Phil, anything to plug this week?
Just a preview, so if you want to read myself and David Castillo writing many words about what will be a probably very short and possibly very one-sided fight, then tune in to us talking about Rozenstruik versus Overeem.
All right. I'm going to have a couple of videos coming out in the near future on UFC, on those UFC 245 title fights, so check out MMANation.com on YouTube to view those, but those probably won't be out until next week. And that's about it. check us out on social media, at Evil Greg Jackson. That's Phil on Twitter, at Boxing Bush. That's me. And until next week, thank you all so much for listening. If you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.